The race to replace New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio is on. It's primary day in the city. New Yorkers are going to head to the polls to pick the Democratic candidate. Whoever wins will be tasked with addressing a city facing skyrocketing crime. Among the candidates vying to take over for de Blasio, Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President, former 2020 presidential candidate Andrew Yang, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. Again, those are the top candidates in the running, but we've got 6 of them on your screen right now.
And amid this, a rising spike in crime in New York and other major U.S. cities, but some on the left now blaming police. Listen.
I think that there are a lot of police unions and GOP operatives that would like for us to believe that this recent crime wave has everything to do with this idea of defunding the police. And many of the cities that have talked about removing that money, like Minneapolis and Seattle, they've actually paused or slowed how they were thinking about moving that money. So this rising crime is not the fault of the movement. It's actually the fault of the police.
Here to react, Brian Lieb, Executive Director for Iranian Americans for Liberty. Also joining us, Jennifer Massey, a Republican strategist, and Dino Skaros, presidential historian, immigration attorney, professor, and also the author of this book, Trumped Up Charges. Wow, the comments made on MSNBC by the commentator there, you saw the host nodding along in agreement. Brian, start us off here. Is the crime the fault of the police?
No, of course not. And I think it's incredibly reckless for people to be making statements like this. At the end of the day, there's more crime happening in major cities throughout America because there's less police on the streets, and the police that are on the streets don't feel empowered to do their jobs. When you look at almost every major metropolitan city, from Philadelphia, my hometown, to New York, to Chicago, to LA, there's a common theme here. The common theme is that they've been controlled by the Democratic Party machine for decades now. So at the end of the day, I think that the leaders at a local level should be doing more to support the police, to invest in the police, instead of taking resources away from them.
Also, this White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki blaming the surge in crime. This one not on police, this one on guns. Listen.
It is an area where the president feels a great deal of the crime we're seeing as a result of gun violence. You can expect he'll speak to that and his commitment to continuing to address gun violence and gun safety in the country.
Jennifer Massey, your thoughts on all of it?
Well, I agree with a little bit of what Jen Psaki was saying, a little bit. Previously, she was talking about how it was a surge and it started rising with Trump. That is true because these well-funded groups like Antifa and BLM started their rhetoric up during his presidency, and destructiveness that added to the spike in crime. They have been not stopped because they keep winning in these Democrat cities. They're never punished. The criminals are released. Their appeasement of these criminals, but it's not having anything to do with the police. The failed urban communities, the policies, the fatherless homes, the failed schools, life choices, these are not the part of the police.
Yeah. No, I recall, too, when we were seeing extreme violence on the West Coast, the former President Donald Trump offering to send in assistance, whether it be National Guards troops, and then those offers were denied. Right. They didn't want to see those troops on the grounds there. Dino, again, we've got apparently police who are behind the crime. We've got gun violence behind the crime, guns specifically, I should say. Take your pick. Dino, which one? How are you viewing this?
Well, nobody's talking about the real issue here, Emma, and this is all very personal for me because I had a ringside seat to all of this. I grew up as a kid in New York City in the 1970s, and we would hear gunfire at night from our windows. We had 3 locks on our front door. And Ed Koch was the mayor of New York, and his answer was, hey, it's New York. That was his answer to everything. I remember my aunts and uncles telling me wonderful stories about how safe New York used to be in the 1940s and 50s before I was born. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to get to see this. And then after Koch, we had David Dinkins, who was a nice man, but an inept leader, much like Jimmy Carter and now like Joe Biden. And he's kind of like the Joe Biden of New York City politics. And then finally, thank goodness, we got Rudy Giuliani, who basically saved New York with his crime fighting tactics. And that spread across the country. And now we have Bill de Blasio, who has basically declawed and neutered the New York City police. So, of course, the criminals are running rampant.
Also, this too, Brian, media reporting that charges are being dropped now in hundreds of looting and burglary cases. As Dino was talking about in New York City, it seems like the NYPD has to let a massive amount of suspected thieves go. Obviously, no consequences if you're just dropping it all. Your thoughts on that in moving in the right direction of getting crime under control amidst the rise in crime?
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, people need to be held accountable for their actions. And what we're seeing in cities all across the country are people not being held accountable for their actions, and they're targeting the police that are supposed to be there, cleaning up our streets, taking guns, taking drugs, and taking criminals off of our streets. So at the end of the day, I firmly believe that we need to be doing more to support our law enforcement, investing more in our law enforcement, and we need to be holding people accountable. This isn't the wild, wild west. It's the United States of America. People need to be held accountable for their crimes.
We'll leave it right there. Brian Leib joining us, Jennifer Massey, and Dino Scaros. If you don't mind, they're our panelists. Stick around.
Coming up, we'll talk about this with our panelists. A new illustration of an illustration of Dr. Anthony Fauci depicts Fauci in a new role. The political cartoon, published in next week's edition of The New Yorker, paints Fauci as a lifeguard with the caption, "The doctor is in no matter what time of year."
Let's bring back in our panelists, Brian Leib, Jennifer Massey, Dino Scaros. Welcome back. Good to see everyone here. Jennifer, apparently Fauci's a lifeguard now. Your thoughts?
Well, Mr. I Am Science, Dr. Fauci, if you look at the picture, he's a lifeguard, depicted as a lifeguard, but he's not looking at the water. So I don't know what he is protecting or who he's supposed to be watching over. It doesn't appear to be the American people at this time. If you look at his recently released emails, he's not interested in any kind of debate with scientists. He's more concerned with the talk shows and talking with the celebrities, when science is supposed to be about rigorous skepticism, which he doesn't seem to have any.
You mentioned talking with different news organizations. We saw he was on the cover of InStyle magazine, I believe, and of course now this political cartoon published in The New Yorker. Well, Newsmax wanted to sit down with Dr. Fauci, at least on Wake Up America, and apparently he didn't have time. He got back to one of our bookers who wanted to sit down for an interview, saying, "Thanks for your interest in arranging an interview with Dr. Fauci. I'm afraid that given the volume of interview and speaking requests he's receiving, the extraordinary demands on his time, he's unable to accommodate your request and must respectfully decline." Brian Leib, do you think that lines up with the number of interviews that we've seen Dr. Fauci give previously?
Of course it doesn't. And we were just talking a little bit earlier on this panel about accountability. I think Dr. Fauci is afraid to appear on Newsmax because he knows that Newsmax is going to hold him accountable and is going to ask tough questions. He'd rather go on, softball interviews with CNN and MSNBC than actually be held accountable. And he needs to be held accountable. And thankfully, there are members of Congress that are pushing on this, and hopefully we'll get a result for the American people.
I want to give just a little credit there to Jennifer. I'm a man of attention to detail myself. When you looked at that portrait from the New York Post, the cartoon picture, you noticed here he's looking up. I actually didn't catch that. And what a catch. You're right. He's out staring off in the sky in this picture. And I wonder if that was actually thought about. Look, because the New Yorker, as you know, they're cartoonists. I mean, that's a very big part of their messaging. Dino Scaros, your thoughts on that, if you'd like, also to weigh in. How busy Dr. Fauci is, as noted by his representation. Of all of his media interviews, he doesn't have time to sit down with us.
Dr. Fauci is a lifeguard who can't swim. That's what he is. Basically, I agree with what Brian said. And Jennifer, that was a good catch, too. I hadn't seen that with Fauci looking off. Its translation of that message is, I don't want to go on a network where they're going to ask me real questions. I want to go somewhere where they're going to say, So what motivated you to become a doctor one day and softball questions like that? So basically, science is supposed to be about testing different theories and not silencing people. It is alarming that so many people place their faith in one person. Quite honestly, I have nothing against the man. I just simply don't listen to him because I have no reason to believe anything that comes out of his mouth is any better than what comes out of anybody else's mouth.
Well, we've heard most recently from Dr. Fauci, an attack on him is an attack on science. So perhaps he didn't want to face those tough questions from the Newsmax team. Yeah. All right, Brian Lieb, Jennifer Massey, Dino Scaros, thank you all, political panelists. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You got it. For a quick look at what's trending on social media right now,